Well, hello, everybody. It's Dan Stein, and I'm here with Ira Mehlman, Affairs Media Director. We're going to talk about, do some hot takes, actually, on some hot issues. Ira has had two absolutely kick-ass, barn-burning op-eds on two topics that I know you want to talk about. We're going to talk about California and the decision to give illegal aliens stimulus checks. They want to give illegal aliens, particularly in California, all kinds of government money when they're running a massive deficit. Now, this decision was made before the recent pandemic of rioting all across the country. And so Ira can add some additional gloss, some additional thoughts about where California is going fiscally and politically. So Ira, welcome.
Thanks very much, Dan.
Right, so you had this op-ed in The Hill, and it looks like it got over 25,000 shares. I mean, it took off and went virally. So what do you think made the piece so effective?
Well, look, obviously we're going through a pandemic. This, as you pointed out, was written and published before all the violence that's taking place on the streets right now. But people are aware of the fact that you have a lot of people in this country who are in deep distress because of the COVID-19 crisis. 40 million people have lost their jobs in the past 2 months. And here you have California very irresponsibly deciding that they're going to give state money to people who lost their jobs that they should never have had in the first place, jobs that they were holding illegally in the first place. And, California has been getting by in the recent years. They've been getting by for a couple of reasons. The stock market has been booming. There's a capital gains tax in California that was paying for a lot of things. There was nearly full employment up until the COVID-19 crisis. But they were acting as though these were things that were never going to change, that there was never going to be any roadblocks. Nobody anticipated anything quite like COVID-19, but I think everybody should have anticipated that the stock market wasn't going to go up forever, that we're not going to have full employment forever. And now they're faced with a $54 billion budget deficit. And, that they simply don't have the money to do any of the basic things that California expects the state to do. And, here they are taking, it's a minimal amount of money, $75 million, but nevertheless, this is money that is desperately needed in other areas right now.
You must be very well off if you think that's a bit of money, 75.
Well, given the trillions that are being thrown around right now, 75 million seems like chump change.
75 million. Look, bottom line here is that there's plenty of evidence, full employment or not, anybody is going to see that there's still a lot of work to be done to help the African-American community assimilate. And one of the arguments we've made for a long time has been economically assimilate. And one of the things we pointed out for a long time is that these various non-immigrant or so-called guest worker, they're not guests, but anyway, programs have actually railroaded African-Americans out of the labor market, and certainly discourage them from pursuing certain occupations that they normally would want to pursue. I don't understand, morally or ethically, what could possibly justify taking it, particularly at this juncture, particularly now, given all the rebuilding work that needs to be done, the tremendous amount of damage. Clearly, there's a lot of training that needs to go into the police and what have you. Where is the priority? How can this be? And isn't this controversial in California?
I think people have just come to accept it. If you go back 25, 30 years, you go back to the origins of the social justice movement. One of the places it began was in Los Angeles with the Justice for Janitors movement. And there was an instance in which African-American unionized janitors working in Los Angeles were being fired and replaced by illegal aliens. And you did have, at the time, the Black leadership standing up along with a lot of other people who were concerned about social justice and saying, this is just wrong. We should not be displacing unionized workers making decent wages and bring in people who are in the country illegally to replace them. But, you got to give the other side credit for persistence, that they just keep at it. They never quit. And eventually they just wear people down. And I think that's what has happened in California. You also have the Black leadership that has kind of sold out to a certain political ideology rather than representing the constituency that they claim to represent. So this is happening in California, but it's also happening elsewhere. And this has been a persistent issue that we've had to deal with, is the persistence of the other side.
Well, what can folks do to counter that persistence? Clearly, we've been able to prevail in many cases, but the political system in California admits of no alternative points of view from what I can tell right now.
Right. I mean, what has happened is that the people who just got worn down picked up and left California. You look at all the cost of living, the deteriorating quality of life, the lack of good services in California. The middle class has pretty much picked up and left. California has become a microcosm of what it's going to look like in a two-class society. So, those who can afford to stay and live and, enjoy the beauty of California and all the wonderful things, they can do it. Uh, but the middle class has picked up and left. And so you have this kind of hollowed out middle, and the political classes are just doing the bidding of the people who remain behind.
Well, what do you think the rich people are going to do now too? Because their shopping malls are getting attacked.
Well,
And what happens to the
Amazon.
whole tax base? I mean, this is, you and I remember the '68 riots and what a setback that was, how long it took to recover from those. What in California, it may take a long time to recover from this.
Yeah, it will. And, as I said, one of the big drivers of the California budget has been capital gains taxes. And the market has rebounded somewhat since, it hit bottom a few weeks ago. But still, that is a lot of lost revenue for the state that they have no place else to make up anymore. There simply isn't anybody else to tap there. And so, they're going to have to find a way to get through this $54 billion budget hole, either by cutting services or raising taxes to a point where even the wealthy people decide they're going to pick up and leave. And now on top of that, you've got the damage and the destruction from the rioting. It's going to be a mess there. It's going to be a mess in a lot of places.
Yeah, I imagine Prince Harry is beginning to wonder why he decided to relocate with Meghan Markle to LA, big welcome party. Yeah, I couldn't help but notice that a lot of the rioting was taking place in cities that have actually gotten a lot of immigration, some of the highest immigration impact areas of the country. You think there's any correlation there?
And, I'm not sure that there's a correlation. They tend to be the cities that have, put the greatest restraints on the police. I mean, you have Mayor de Blasio sitting there telling the police not to just stand by and observe. You've got stores being looted on Fifth Avenue, and the police are standing there, maybe catching the occasional guy coming out of a store with merchandise. But that probably has far more to do with it than anything else. Just this idea that.
But they keep saying, and you get these liberal bastions, Minnesota, right, Minneapolis, here in Montgomery County or whatever. They say that there's tremendous. They call it segregation. It's not de jure segregation, but they say that the income gaps, the disparity, the community isolation is often greater in these areas that have had lots of immigration. And of course, this is not surprising because yes, many of those cities are also economically well off because they have a lot of jobs. That's why the people, immigrants go there. But by the same token, the class stratification, the income stratification winds up leaving an alienated population of people who are kind of left out. And so you'll notice there weren't a lot of riots in some of these areas that don't get a lot of immigrants. That's not universally the case, but certainly you notice that it's these major cities that also seem to be Democrat-controlled jurisdictions. Can't not notice that, right?
No, I mean, obviously, these are the places where it's happening. For a lot of reasons, you've got the political structures there that have basically abandoned the concept of law enforcement. Getting back to New York, I mean, it's not just New York City, but New York State. The legislature passed a bill that says, we're just going to turn people out on the street without any bail. So, I mean, I'm not sure where it begins and where it ends, but this is kind of a cyclical thing where, you've started a snowball here and there is a breakdown in general sense of order. Look, I'm clearly in Minneapolis. You had a rogue police officer and three other rogue police officers who just watched him basically murder somebody for no good reason. Clearly, there have been issues with police departments around the country, and Minneapolis apparently is one of them. But again,
But Minneapolis is a jurisdiction that has been most, anti-police, if you will, most considerate of the idea that police training needs to be respectful of all communities. This didn't happen in some rural area somewhere in the sticks somewhere. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. We don't have all the facts regarding what happened in that incident anyway. but the point was, if it was a needless death, it was horrible, and we can all agree on that. And anybody's death is needless in that context, and certainly the idea that someone should die for a $25 counterfeit bill is absurd. But we still need to get all the facts about what happened. But the bottom line, though, is, having a soft on crime approach and telling the police to dial it back or go easy or light touch, whatever de Blasio calls it, doesn't seem to create an immunity from police misconduct. So, in the meantime, the Chinese government is issuing statements laughing at the United States, okay, having taken us to the cleaners economically and on a trade policy basis, and stealing our technology. They're now laughing at us and saying that only their system works, that somehow the democratic system that the framers of this country, Constitution developed 200 some years ago, is no longer of any use, and we should all be like the People's Republic of China. And the Trump administration responded to that. This was your second op-ed, this whole question of Chinese students and technology theft. Do you want to give us a little briefing on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, things work in China because they rule with an iron fist. I mean, any kind of regime that does that can keep people in order, at least for an extended period of time until finally the system breaks. But that's clearly not the direction I think anybody wants to go. We don't want that kind of heavy-handed government here in the United States, and it certainly isn't even tolerable in China. But getting back to the issue of stealing technology, this is something that China has been doing for generations. They have basically co-opted a lot of our technology. They've marketed it. They've, certainly been very good at that. But we have basically opened up our major research institutions to Chinese students because the government of China is paying full tuition, so the universities love it. But what we get in exchange, or what we lose in exchange, is all this technology that's flowing to China. It is being produced much more cheaply than we can do it here in the United States, and they're collaborating us in the open market. Look, I mean, we should have an open door to foreign students. We should have cultural exchanges. But we also need to expect that when we allow people into this country, they are going to be coming for the purposes that they say, to acquire an education, not to steal our technology. And by the way, there's an interesting book that came out, I forget the title of it, detailing how Stalin did exactly the same thing to us back in the 1930s. He sent students to MIT. They acquired the technology that helped the Soviet Union and eventually resulted in a spy network here in the United States. So these are the sorts of things we need to be learning from, and we should not be.
Why do we want to let it happen? What's the value in the end? Cultural exchange is not, filling up ice cream cones on the boardwalk in Rehoboth Beach. Cultural exchange is not being a babysitter. And, foreign students come here to learn, but the point is, if they're part of an apparatus that is deliberately being set up to steal American technology and put us at a competitive disadvantage, what are we getting out of that?
Well, I guess the universities are getting full tuition, but not much else out of that. I mean, we have to recognize that China is a hostile regime. It's not the people of China.
Why are we bringing in their foreign students? I mean, essentially, we agree with the ban, don't we?
Yes, we do need to set limits, and we do need to make sure that those Chinese students who are admitted don't have direct connections to the Chinese government. You have members of the Chinese military who are coming in here posing as students. So we do need to at least vet people to make sure that if they're coming for the education that they claim to be coming for, that it is for legitimate purposes, not at the behest of the government, as I said, a hostile government, so that they can use the information against us.
Why do you think it is, Ira, that when the Soviet Union was robust in operation and the KGB was active, Americans had a very careful approach to Russian intelligence, Russian operatives, stealing technology, or what have you. And the Communist Party in China is every bit as ruthless and autocratic as anything that Stalin or Lenin ever conceived. Why do Americans have this more casual approach to the Chinese government when they're so comparable?
Well, the point is that for 20, 30 years,
they're manufacturing things in China and we're buying them cheap, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we are getting that benefit, but for 20 or 30 years, we did have this relationship with the Soviet Union where they were sending students to some of our top universities and stealing our technology. And that was actually Stalin. That was part of his deliberate plan. So it took a long time, but having made that mistake, we should learn from it, not repeat it.
Well, this issue is so part and parcel now of what seems to be an urgent need to curtail guest worker programs generally. The OPT program, which works in concert with the F student visa, they go on the OPT or optional training program, OPT, and then they move to the H-1B program for skilled, semi-skilled workers. Employers petition for them, and those employers and those universities are fighting very hard to try to convince the Trump administration not to do what makes sense. At a time of 40 million plus Americans out of work, young people today facing some of the most difficult job markets that they have in decades. Certainly, this would be a time to give them a break and provide an opportunity for employers to have to work to hire American workers. So, we all need to work together to try to push back on these corporate lobbyists that are so powerful and influential. We can be just as powerful, but we have to stick together. And that's why folks need to go to our website and look for the action opportunities involved on all these issues here at fairus.org. Anything you want to add, Ira?
Yeah, I mean, we saw the president back down in the face of pressure from the business community. When he originally announced that he was going to sign this executive order, the New York Times, their exact words was the business community exploded in anger. And within 24 hours, the president had done a 180 on this. Now you have, 7 Republican senators sending a letter to the president saying, don't curtail any of these guest worker programs. So, it is coming from both sides of the political spectrum here. And there is no,
you can see
in the current situation why we need massive guest workers.
Well, I mean, finally the cover's been ripped off, the fraud. People can now see full on what's going on with these guest worker visas, that they're just completely fraudulent. Their purpose is to provide cheap labor for employers of varying skill levels. They don't want to hire American workers for lots of reasons, because they basically believe these non-immigrant guest workers will either work cheaper or harder or more scared, or they have more leverage over them. They prefer them for a variety of reasons. For the same reason, growers prefer illegal aliens to hiring U.S. citizens. There are lots of reasons to discriminate against American workers, and certainly the African-American community has been really unfairly treated under these programs. And many of these same social justice warriors from the civil rights movement, who have been so allegedly concerned about the African-American community, have been the first ones in line to shift their allegiance to the fashionable advocacy for immigrants and immigrant workers. And this is a huge national tragedy to see what's happening. And everybody needs to finally realize, FAIR has been right all along for 40 years. A country should basically do its own work. We need to have an investment in each other's financial success as a community. Capitalism only works if capital has a commitment to the community to which it's tied. Globalization is an interesting theory, but in the time of economic and structural changes, it winds up leaving Americans behind. Why would they want to support a system that seems to leave them in the dust? So this is a time to rethink this whole strategy and realize that only through a commitment to our own workers here can we actually survive as a nation. But whatever short-sighted thinking we see from these businesses is politically untenable, and frankly, they're damaging the president's chances for re-election. So we will watch very closely what happens, but here at FAIR, we're always involved. That's FAIRUS, FAIRUS.org is our website. Get on immigrationreform.com for the latest in commentary. And of course, people like Ira, always producing great op-eds in major papers. So join us, be involved, and we will see you soon.